Hello, welcome back to Fireside Frit, the podcast brought to you by the Asatru Community. Together, we'll inspire inclusivity, share wisdom, and strengthen the bonds of our Norse pagan community. If you're new here, hello, hi, welcome. My name is Susanna, and I like to explore topics related to Norse heathenry and shared traditions and experiences, aiming to serve and inspire the Asatru community and beyond. A little disclaimer, this episode's a little different. I just had surgery. Since I'm working my schedule around my healing process, and some days are better than others, I'm not doing any guests because we're not doing a meet the board, meet the clergy, or a holiday episode. That being said, it's just me today. The episode will be a little shorter. I did do a poll on the Asatru Community Facebook group, and this is the one that got number 1. So the subject today is all about sacred spaces in Norse paganism. Just in case, I'm going to read some of these sources at the beginning. All right. We have the VikingAnswerLady.com in her article, Sacred Space in Viking Law and Religion. We have anglotheod.org. The article is Sacred Space in the Lore and Modern Paganism. And then I have a small entry from Wikipedia, because we don't have an English translation that I can find, about Astrafarvisur. And I could be saying that wrong. There's a 90% chance. As usual, we're going to start with our historical background. We'll move into some modern interpretations and how to set up your own sacred space. Elements that may include a dedication ritual if you choose to do that. And then we'll close up the shop. So grab a drink and let's go. Historical background. Sacred spaces are generally vacant when the ritual, or think about like if church or graduation or the game, if these things are not happening, these spaces are generally pretty vacant, if not haunting, because it's so empty, right? Sacred spaces in Norse and Germanic traditions are historically natural features in the wild. We're talking meadows, open air areas, like a clearing in the forest or beneath a big mountain. The main difference between these Germanic and Norse holy spaces is that they are not man-made. They may have man-made pieces next to them or other halls next to them, but they were generally more Mother Nature than something we build, like a church. So the actual pagan churches have not been discovered by archaeologists because, as far as we understand, they weren't there. They were more the grandeur of Mother Nature than it was something that we built to worship it. These holy spaces or holy sites were often found near farmsteads, so it made more sense that it was part of that Innengard. If you look at the Innengard-Utengard relationship that our ancestors had with the land, they had those that were in the realm of the gods, in the people, and then everything outside. So you had your farmland with your hof, with your grove, with the vey, with all these different sites that we're going to talk about that were often near a farmstead. Speaking of those places, first thing we're going to talk about is a vey. So vey's literal translation is sacred area. This is our holy enclosures. What these historians wrote down was that generally in the vey, where they did their sacred rites, like a blot, there was no violence. These spaces were for public worship, and sometimes a vey could be 200 meters long. So this is kind of like the public worship area. So a space for all the people who lived in that area where they would do their seasonal bloats. There's not a lot of sources, there's hardly any source at all, about an in-home altar. However, I couldn't find a translated English source, but this is what I found from Wikipedia, is the Astrafarvisur. That's what I said in my source list a couple minutes ago. What I've heard from other people who either speak the language or have found an English translation or a translation in a modern text that they can understand is that they did speak of a home altar. I cannot say what it was. Like I said, I could not find it in English, but that's just what some of my sources say. If you want more information on that, please follow the links in the show notes because I will put all of those in there as usual. All right, so we had our ve, we had our at home, which I have no clue what that was, so use your imagination, I suppose. And then we have our hörgr. I might be saying that wrong, but its translation means pile of stones. So a traditional Norse pagan altar, according to archaeology texts, the sagas, an altar would be outdoors and made of stone and reddened with blood. Now, before you come in and fight me on that, this was part of their animal sacrifice, kind of like in a blot where you sprig with the mead in modern days. They would sprig their quote-unquote temple, like this ve or the hogr, with the blood of the animal that was being sacrificed. I do not condone animal cruelty. You know, there are ethical ways to do things. If you're a farmer, for instance, or if you're a hunter, this episode's not about ethics, so we can get into that if you would like to. Modern laws and ethics. The only thing is I don't want to get political. So moving right along, the traditional altar was reddened with blood. And though we have not a whole lot from our sources, but we can learn from comparing to nearby pagans of what they did. So in Proto-Germanic, the hörgr, it means stone heap or pile of stone altar. In Old English, we have hörgr, which means pile of stones, grove, or temple. In Old High German, hörgr or hörgr pronunciations, it means pile of stones or sacred space. Hörgr is different than a hof and is not a hof, but a hof can have a hörgr. And once I get down into defining what exactly a hof is, this will make more sense. So basically, the hörgr is an altar, it's a monument to the gods, and an act of building it was also part of the worship. The pile of stones, yes, that was man-made, but we know it's not a permanent structure like earthquakes or, you know, things can happen and move it, essentially. However, this pile of stones, the act of building it sanctified the space and made it sacred. These piles of stones, this hörgr, it was either built in sacred spaces or you can build a hörgr to make a space sacred. An example would be if you bought land and you want to have a ve there or a hof there, something that is a sacred space for you and your family. You could go and find stones from around the property from your land and build a small mound. And these hörgrs, they could be small or they could be huge piles of rocks, large like burial mounds. There isn't any rules that I'm aware of, but it does seem that the bigger ones were associated with burial mounds. All right, a hof is kind of like a temple, but it's more a dedicated indoor space. Unlike Christian churches, these pagan temples were places to visit on rare occasions and would be in harmony with nature. Whereas the other churches that were popping up during the Christianization period, where people would go to church every day, or nowadays, I think it's once or twice a week. In our pagan temples back in the day, it would be either yearly or every 9 years. There's texts of, say, Uppsala, for an example. Did they go once a year or did they go every 9 years? Who's to say? The point is that it was on rare occasions. Not to say that it was even more sacred, but distance makes the heart grow fonder. If we think that, and then if you're only going to these sacred spaces once a year or once every so often, and then your other bloats are happening more familial or with your neighbors, it kind of does make you hold it at a different pedestal. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, these hofs were usually open air with some sort of enclosure. It didn't really have idols. That came later. It was kind of introduced by Christianity. And a hof was more of a feast hall because it was their indoor area. So a feast hall to go to after the ritual. Whereas the ve was where they would do the ritual. And then the hof was where they ate and did sumbel or feasting and merriment. At the ritual site, it's not like there's a restroom there. That needs to be a little distance from it, especially when we're talking about getting drunk with the homies at Sumble. Like you need to practice clean and healthy practices for your sacred space. Most of our information for a Hof would be found in some of the sagas, and I think I've used this source in every single podcast talking about history, but Adam of Bremen's account of Uppsala. Okay, so we talked about Ve, hörgr, the Hof, the Austrafravisir. I'll get the hang of saying that word eventually. Next up, we have our groves or burial mounds or other natural sites. These are the open air sites that are more for larger bloats and animal sacrifices would happen here. And we have evidence from the Heimskringla and the Gulating law book about the details on that. Basically, you would do any kind of ancestral work near the burial mounds, obviously, because that's where they are. The ancestor bloats or any celebration that was huge, you're gonna go to the grove or the burial mounds for that. This last one's kind of odd. Legally, we can't really do this anymore. I mean, or if we did, we have to do it in a way that is proper. You know, we're not trying to hurt anybody for real. The last sacred space, historically speaking, is the hörgr. It's a funny word. I like that word. So this is essentially sacred fighting that took place in a 12-foot square near the ritual site. We know that in groves, in hofs, in veys, they had barriers, you know, representing that this is Innengard, Utengard is out there. And in the enclosure, this was a space where it was peaceful. We had frith. Even if you had warring tribes coming to an Althing, it didn't matter at this space. In this space, it is sacred and we're not fighting each other. However, they did have this holy and sacred space for duels, and these duels could have been for anything, really. It seems sometimes the ethics are really interesting. I don't think it would fly today, but say if you are warring with another tribe, you might call out one of them and they might send their slave to fight in their stead. Or if they want to do some sort of warrior practice, then they had a space to do that. And I'm sure it was mildly entertaining too, because I mean, we watch UWE, if that's what it's still called, I don't know, WrestleMania or whatever. We watch that for entertainment today. I can't speak what I wasn't witnessing. There could be many reasons why they had a sacred space, but I think if we could think psychologically, is that if everything here is meant for peace, we have our Ve, our Hof, our burial mounds that are super sacred because of their ancestors. We can't be violent around any of these other places. I'm sure after having a couple meads, couple gallons of mead, you know, like these people probably were get a little antsy, like I need to go burn off some energy. I'm getting excited. So I can't say that that's what they were doing, but from personal experience, I think I would be in the pit after a couple hornfuls of ale, you know. Anyway, the hörgr had a rope enclosure with posts in the four corners of the little 12-foot square where people would have their duels. There was very sacred rules, and if the rules were crossed, if people started bleeding, they pulled them out. And there was rules. I got a lot of the information for that is going to be in the VikingAnswerLady.com's article, The Sacred Space in Viking Law and Religion. It's really cool, but it was kind of confusing. So if you want to learn more about that, I encourage you to go read her article. It is quite lengthy. All right. So in that enclosure, it was designed to keep the violence in that space, and everything else was still sacred and encouraged frith. That is our history background of describing the different kinds of sacred spaces that they had in Scandinavian or Nordic culture. Now we're going to move on to some modern interpretations. What sacred spaces look like today? The types of spaces we have today are going to be a little different because the land isn't as wild and free, especially in the United States. Public land, you have to treat it differently than just going and drinking on it. You know, there's like public intox and public indecency. There's like all kinds of laws we have about this. So we're going to go into that a little bit. So the types of modern sacred spaces. We have outdoor spaces. We can still utilize these today, though our cultures are much more diverse and the likelihood that you are within walking distance of other Norse pagans is slim. This makes it a little difficult to have a permanent ritual space. This is easier for people with property because they can cultivate how they want. However, it is not impossible to utilize public spaces, especially since we're taking inspiration from the ancients and how their sacred spaces were naturally occurring spaces in the wild. So we're talking gardens, groves, rock formations, even fire pits. All of these things we can find, and it's not going to be as natural per se if you go to a park and there's some obvious man-made things there. But you have to think there is a reason why the parks are where they are. So in a way, reserving that space to still be natural for the most part, landscaping aside, it's still in nature, especially for those of you who live in cities and you might not have anything outside of a local park. You can still utilize that space. And we'll talk a little bit later as to how, but I just wanted to touch base on that. There are options, so we have parks, we have national parks. If you want something a little bit more closer to what an outdoor holy space would be, go hiking in a place that has a national park. You will see the holy space, I promise you. And it's going to look possibly different to everyone on your hiking trip, or if you're going alone. I don't recommend that because, cryptids. That's our outdoor spaces. Also, if you do have land and you can do what you want with it, you have a little bit more freedom, and you could potentially make your own vey or hörgr or hof, which a hof just being a dining space, you can do that without even putting walls up. It could just be like a pavilion for when you have barbecues and stuff, or if you wanted to have people over for ritual. Now we're going to move on to our indoor spaces. I don't have a lot to say about that because we know what that is, because I talk about it every time we have an episode on the holidays. I talk about personal indoor altars. So our indoor spaces would be altars, whether they're dedicated rooms in our house if we have that kind of space, or shelves. As far as altars go, I have little mini altars all over my house depending on what its purpose is, and those work great for bookshelves, honestly. And I really like the bookshelf one and changing it out seasonally, but also my coffee table, which isn't the greatest idea if you have small children, but I don't, so I use my coffee table as kind of a little altar space too. So even though most of our ancestors worshipped outside in the grandeur of nature, according to that one source that's hard to pronounce, Austrafrazir, though as you guys know, I couldn't find the full translation. Others have made it clear that there are mentions of a home altar. Now, I have no idea what it says. My thought is to get creative. Change it up for the seasons, make it personal. You can have candles, incense, a depiction of a deity or an ancestor, your runes. If you're into runes, you can put little crystals up there if you're into that. I think a house altar should be more personal to you and your home, to serve as a reminder of your oaths, your ancestors, and inspire you to honor nature and the gods. Portable spaces. So pocket altars are a thing. I've seen a bunch of Wiccan ones that you can buy on like Etsy or some other places, but you can make them Norse Pagan. And I'm pretty sure there are some retailers out there that sell a Norse Pagan one. I will look into that if you want. If you want me to research that and get you information for that, comment on this, whether you're listening on YouTube or Spotify or wherever. Leave a comment, I get an email. Moving right along. These pocket altars are really cool, I will say. So whether you make them or buy them, it's great for military folks in the field. It's great for adventurous people who are rarely home, and for people who just like miniature things. I know I like miniature things because I end up having to carry a lot of stuff with me to work in my bag, between like paperwork, tablet, chargers, snacks. I do like having miniature things for on the go. Depending on your intent with your portable kit, small amounts of alcohol may or may not be a good idea. Please practice safe and smart choices with alcohol. Water is sacred too. So if you have your water bottle on you, you're good. I wouldn't worry much about mead or other alcoholic libations in your portable kit. Tea light candles to take place of a ritual fire. On a previous episode with Dave Nix, I think it was episode 3, we talked about using dice for the runes so that you can pack lightly. Matches are good too for your candle, and mini incense. You can actually make your own incense, and you can use herbs from Scandinavia, or the ones that were popular with our herbal medicines back in the day, because they're the ones that grow there naturally. And you can buy those herbs online and make your own incense. And that's kind of cool, because then you can make mini ones that will fit in your pocket altar. Of course, a Mjolnir pendant. A lot of us wear them as necklaces, like you can see here. But if you're not really a necklace wearer, or for whatever reason you don't want to wear it on your person, you can just pack it in your little pocket kit. Community spaces versus personal practice. The major thing I'd like to point out is that if you use a community space for a ritual, leave it looking just as good, if not better, than when you found it. Some places don't like you stacking stones, so be mindful, but have fun with it. Don't be digging holes in a park. You can't force the grass to grow back as soon as you leave. Be wise about it. If your ritual is in a park, whether it be a public city park or a national forest, be respectful and leave no trace. Your personal space is a little different. You should give it the same care and respect for a public space, because it is a direct reflection of you and your relationship with the spirits. What you want to honor or what you want to become, just keep it clean, free of dust or dirt. Show the spirits that when they are called upon and you welcome them into your home, they have a place that remains at the ready for them when they need it at any time. Now going into the creating of your sacred space. Choose a location. How do we choose a location? Well, inside, outside, temporary, or permanent. First of all, temporary or permanent. Do you have a place where you can make a permanent altar? If not, then don't do it, because it sucks to have to tear it down later. And then we're talking inside or outside. That kind of depends on a lot of things. Do you live in a big city? Do you have the resources to make an outside sacred space? If it's for just a ritual, sure, you can take a little trip outside of the city and go to a national forest or find some nature and stack your stones and do your ritual. And that would actually be pretty cool. And you can leave your stones and see if they're still there next time you want to do a ritual. If you don't have access to the outdoors, or if you find yourself not knowing any other pagans and just don't want to go out into the woods at night alone, understandable, you do have the option to do a ritual space or a sacred space indoors, whether that be a shelf altar, a nightstand altar, however you see fit for your practice, because this is your personal practice. Once you figure out of all those different types what you're going to do, then you can go forth with setting your intention. Whether you're dedicating a seasonal altar to, say, if it's for Disting and you're honoring the Disir, or if it's Victory Blot and you're honoring victory gods and goddesses, whatever your intention is for that space, whether it's a seasonal one, an ancestral one, or an oath one, like, hey, I want to learn more of the runes. We're going to put Odin up here and my runes and some other stuff just to inspire you and to remind you. Whatever it is that your intention is, your tools of practice, that needs to reflect what the intention is for this altar. So that's more for like your indoor spaces, everything I just said. But it's the same thing with outdoors. If you are setting an intention and if it's specifically for bloat, what do you need for that space? Is this the space you're going to use all the time? Can it be permanent? If not, you can write your setting of your intentions into your ritual. And that's kind of what the hammer rite is. And in my group, the hammer rite is our pre-ritual ritual, but we have a pre-ritual before the hammer rite to set the tone and sanctify the space for what work we intend on doing. Once you choose the location and set your intention, your elements of your sacred space may or may not include an altar or a focal point. So like I was saying, you have your stone altars, your bookshelf altars, your temporary or your pocket altars, outdoor altars for spaces that you own or that you're allowed to go back to. Then you have your offerings and symbols, runes, statues, bowls, candles, things of that nature. Your natural elements, of course, you want probably wood if you're going to be doing a fire, if you're allowed to do a fire. And it's going to be different depending on which kind of sacred space you're creating. Anywho, stones, wood, bones, plants, all these natural elements can or cannot take place in your sacred space. And of course, your tools for the ritual work if you're setting this up to do a ritual right then and there. Of course, you have your Blot bowl, your hammer, incense, anything else that you may need. If you're sprigging, a sprig, of course. Next, we're going to talk about how to claim and bless this space. This would be like a ritual of dedication. So once you have chosen your location, set your intent, got all the elements you're going to add to this space, you may choose or not to do a ritual of dedication. This is something that I include, like I said, in all of my rituals. That's the pre-ritual, which is the hammer rite, and the cleansing and grounding. Like I said earlier, this is something that I include in all of my rituals, partially because not only does it prepare the space, but it prepares the ritual group or the kindred for the events to come and the work we're about to do. If it's a space in your home or on your property and you wish to do a special introductory ritual of dedication, by all means, do what feels right to you here. What you can do if you do choose to do some sort of ritual of dedication for this sacred space, some options are the hammer rite or a land blessing. In our episode on Distang, that's episode 2, we talk about several different land blessings that you could opt to do should you want to. So check out that episode if you want to learn more. Another thing you can do is calling upon the deities and the land spirits to bless that space. And of course, you want to bring them some sort of offering or gift for that because it's the right thing to do when you're establishing Frith in a new space. Those are ways that I think you could do a ritual of dedication, but by all means, you can be creative here. This is your ritual of dedication. Whatever feels right to you. I know I keep saying that, but there is a lot of recreation involved in our faith, and we have to remember that we do have to be creative, though sometimes it can be difficult to come up with your own stuff right off the bat. That's why we offer these discussions, so that hopefully it can inspire you and kind of push you in the right direction without telling you what to do, because I'm not ever going to tell you what to do. Next, we're going to talk about maintenance and upkeep. As I stated earlier about our bookshelf or our at-home sacred spaces, we need to maintain it, we need to upkeep it. We need cleansing, refreshing our items. You can do offering schedules. I like to do adaptations for the seasons, like changing it up a little bit. Otherwise, it gets kind of boring for me. And if it's boring for me, it might be boring for the gods and the landvættir. Might as well change it up a bit, especially if you want to use natural plants in decor. It's nice to change out your old dead ones. I end up using the dead plants to help start the fire for the next ritual. So, I mean, is it lazy? I don't know. Do I enjoy it? Yeah, so whatever. Some of our common challenges are living spaces, living in apartments or living in big cities. Like I was saying, you can do small altars or travel kits. There's also, with the age of technology that we are in, the advent of digital spaces. What I mean by digital spaces is having sacred space online. So for us, it would be like the Asatru Community's Facebook page or our website when we do Facebook events every now and then where it's like a live video chat. We are establishing Frith. We're communicating together. The intention is to celebrate community together. That's what I mean by digital space. And of course, I always ask people to share their thoughts. And by commenting on all our stuff, by creating that Frith with each other, we can make the Asatru community sacred for everyone. So that's cool. The other common challenge with living spaces, if you live in a big city or an apartment or you just don't have access to nature, is the lack of privacy. Because if you do end up going to a park or a national park, you never know who's gonna walk by. So you just have to make yourself aware that that is a possibility. And if you do want more privacy, you can do more subtle sacred spaces like going on a walk and journaling and doing personal rituals at home. I know not everybody's super social and they don't want to deal with running into strangers while they're trying to have a sacred moment. but that's just like some options for our more introverted pals out here. Another common challenge would be sharing space with non-Heathens. I know our group is a little more eclectic. We're pretty heathen with some seasonings of other things. When it comes to sharing space with non-Heathens, I always say just be open-minded and respectful, and hopefully they will also treat you the same way and no one will have to ask anyone to leave, because that's always a challenge. However, like I said, if you prefer a more private method, there are ways, and you don't have to share the space with non-Heathens if you don't want to. But I understand the need for wanting to practice in person with other heathens, because this is a community religion. It's not a big mega church or a small introverted thing. It is very much a community-driven faith, and it is important, and it is hard when there's no other heathens around you, but you would be surprised. There's probably more than you think. I always tell people, get online, find your Facebook group, your Ren Fair people, your LARP people. There's a lot of Norse people in there. They're out there. You just gotta find them and network. Obviously, there's weather challenges, but some people like it when it rains. Some people don't. There can be protective coverings. There's indoor alternatives. Honestly, just look at the weather apps before you go out there and try to have a sacred experience. Anyway, that's the episode. Our key points are that our ancestors pretty much always had outdoor spaces to practice. And when they were indoors, it was for other things. Usually sleeping or protecting during the winter, or specifically for these holy spaces like a hof, it would be a feasting hall. We can't always do that in modern day due to living situations or not owning property or not living in places with trees. I know if you're part of my group and you live in El Paso, we have sand everywhere, and it doesn't really feel the same as in a place with a forest. We make do, and we have alternatives set in place to get us to the right mindsets for our rituals and still have a good experience sharing frith with the gods and other spirits. If you have pictures of your sacred space, share them on our Facebook page. That's the Asatru Community Inc. Because it would be really cool to see your sacred spaces, whether, it's indoors, outdoors, or if it was a temporary setup at a national park or what have you. I'm excited to hear from you all and see what you got, and I will also share mine. Thank you for joining us on Fireside Frith. If you have any questions, stories, or reflections you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you at podcast@theasatrucommunity.com. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Check out our socials at Fireside Frith Pod or theasatrucommunity.com. Until next time, may your hearth be warm and your path be guided by frith and wisdom. Skull! Our music is by hot_dope and NotProd. This episode is produced by the Asatru Community and hosted by myself. The rest of my sources are from YouTube. We have Jackson Crawford's video, Historical Worship of the Norse Gods. We have another YouTube channel, Norse Magic and Beliefs, that I highly encourage you guys to check out. 4 videos from him. The first one is Where to Practice Blot. Second one, Why Are Groves Sacred Places? Next one, Norse Pagan Altar / hörgr, the historically accurate way. And 4, Norse Pagan Temples, what the historical sources say. I'll see you guys next time. Toodles!